today is Gary Joyner. And from the steady stream of people who have been coming up to say hi to him this afternoon, I gather a lot of y'all already know Gary. Gary's a local historian. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Gary, I'd like to introduce you by way of reading about the author in the book History Matters by Gary Joyner. And I think this will give you a good insight into his views of history and historians. Gary Joyner visited his first battlefield at age 4, setting the stage for his love of history. It was reinforced when in the 7th grade, on a school field trip to Vicksburg National Battlefield, he heard the park's historian, the great Ed Bears, relate the story of the battle. I wasn't sure what a historian did, but I knew I wanted to do what he did, Gary said. These experiences were reinforced by a love of learning nurtured by his parents and grandparents in a small southern town in North Louisiana, where storytelling was part of his daily life. They molded his mind and created a foundation for his career as a history professor. His early academic interest of Roman and ancient history evolved into World War II and aviation history, and eventually back to Civil War history, his first love. Telling stories about history, which he terms the great soap opera of life, is part of who he is. Educated at Louisiana Tech University and St. Martin's College and Lancaster University in the United Kingdom, he today holds the Mary Ann and Leonard Selver Professorship of History at Louisiana State University in Shreveport. He is also the director of the Red River Regional Studies Center at the university. Gary has authored or edited numerous books, articles, and technical reports, and has been a consultant in history to ABC, the Associated Press, A&E Network, C-SPAN, the Discovery Channel, HGTV, the History Channel, MSNBC, and MTV, among others. An ardent fan of public radio, he serves on the advisory board for the Red River Radio Network, where History Matters is broadcast on Tuesday mornings at 7:35. He is a popular speaker for local, regional, and national organizations, where he shares his passion for history and his research into the U.S. Civil War. He lives in Shreveport with his wife, Marilyn. With that, I'd like to introduce my friend, Gary Joyner.
Appreciate that. I don't know who that guy is. I'm just in the hospital. There's something that I like to start with talking on the subject of us in Shreveport. Who are we? Where do we come from? Is there any place you could go and try to see what we used to be? We can't do that with as many old buildings as we used to. Many being torn down for greater uses. Not good. Where can you go? How can you identify what we are? There's one place, and that's Oakland Cemetary. Now, as a rural southerner, I grew up, my grandmother every Saturday afternoon said, "Come on, we're going to go see our people." Now, you might think we're going to go down the road, Sardis Community of Union Parish, and see some cousins. No, we went to the cemetery, where I was inculcated with who my people were. And I'm very fortunate, because after a while, you really do get to know them. I was out this weekend with Channel 6 at Oakland. They wanted to do a piece for Sunday Night News. And I had two of my seniors with me. We're mapping Oakland Cemetery. And these kids are not from Shreveport. One of them is from Thibodeau, and the other one's from Plainview. So why should they care about Oakland Cemetery? And Stacy Boggs, who is going to be a very fine historian one of these days, not too distant future, is talking to the reporter from Channel 6, and she said, "You know, it's strange. you get to know them, and you get to know something about them. You want to study them. And when I'm out here and I'm napping, I'll go back and see how they're doing, and I'll clean out their graves. And you take pride of ownership in that. And she's exactly right. Oakland is just beside and to the north of Municipal Auditorium. It's 4 square blocks, roughly about 10 acres. It dates from 1847. The oldest grave in there is 1842. Figure that out. 6 people were moved from the original cemetery. There were only 6 in it. Shreveport doesn't start till 1835. And the oldest grave is Rufus Sewell, who was the 2nd mayor of Shreveport. Like his brother, who was the 1st mayor of Shreveport, both were killed in duels. Rufus is on the east side. You go out to Oakland, and now you can see the city is putting in a huge amount of work on it through bond money. The main gate's been restored. The same company that built the original gate, we contacted. They have the plans from 1906, and they made the new iron after it was destroyed by a particularly well-aimed shot from a drunk who totaled his car and took out the front gate. Pretty good for iron, you know. Horrendously expensive work. We've now got a lot for the first time, of sidewalks in it that separate the sections of the blocks. And hopefully, as we speak, they're doing the forming up for the concrete for the road that's in it. It's sort of a U-shaped road. Who's in there? I would be lying if I told you how many people, because we simply do not know. Our best guess, and I've been working on this about 10 years, is that there's roughly 4,500 people in there. There are 2,800 monuments. There are concrete, simple, what are called folk monuments. There are grand marble, granite, composites, even monuments that are made, they're blue. Terrific looking thing. And they're hollow. You can buy them as a kit. Called white bronze. To everybody else, that's zinc. White bronze sounds fancier, so, well, you know what they did. One firm built them in the United States, in Connecticut. And when you knew you were about to go, or your family's ready to bring in a monument, you contract with this place, and they would build you whatever you wanted. All kinds of iconography. 16 mayors are in Oakland. About 1,000 Confederate soldiers. Roughly 9 to 10 Union soldiers. I say 9 to 10 because there's a couple of them that didn't want to be shown as Union soldiers in the Deep South. And so you got to research them to figure out, were they really there? The mother of Shreveport and the mother of Bossier City, Mary Bennett Kane, was there. She fostered the first attempt to bring the arts to Shreveport. She also fostered a stability in how government worked. Talk about a fascinating life. Here's a woman who was born in 1812, was in Shreveport, before it was called Shrevetown, when Henry Shreve came here. And she died the year before the Wright brothers flew. That's a lie. 3 husbands, loved the first 2. Got rid of the 3rd. Ran him out of town, ran him out of the state. Nobody ever heard from him again. He does have a street named for him in Bossier City. It's called Alexander Street. Anybody know where Alexander Street is? It's a little bitty scrawny thing. Mary Bennett Kane knew what to do. Shreveport's most famous battle, Annie McKinney, is there. show center, just north. If she could rise out of her grave, she could look out at the site of her former house on the other side of the Millennium Studio today. Yes, she was a man. She was also a suffragette. She worked very hard, and now we're finding some links that make it apparent that she worked with Mary Bennett Kane to get women not only the right to vote, which neither of them would see, but did of course work, to bring health care in here. They both helped Dr. Shumpert begin his mission. Two very different lives, and yet two very interesting women. There's also a number of movers and shakers, some of whom are almost forgotten today. More famous ones, both Ed and Ben Jacobs and their families are there. First National Bank, before that E and B Jacobs Bank, where Spring Street Museum is. They're there. Magnificent tombs. Stories that go along with how those tombs were created. Reverend Tucker, is another one of my favorites. Reverend Tucker was the senior minister of what would become First Baptist Church. And he was here during the Civil War. Reverend Tucker was delivering his sermon one Sunday morning in April 1864 when a rather rowdy group of guys came in after burning down Lawrence, Kansas. And that would be William Clark Quantrill and his raiders that were brought into Shreveport to answer to Kirby Smith as to why they burned down a perfectly nice town when you're trying to get those people to be on your side. Well, the first thing is they wouldn't have been on your side because they were all Republicans. Quantrill came in to apologize, and he was doing a good job of apologizing, having breakfast with the commanding general of everything the Confederates have between Mississippi and California, when one of his rather inebriated cavalrymen thought it would be just so much of a hoot to ride his horse into First Baptist Church during the sermon. The door bursts open, he rides in, he rides all the way up to the front, thinking that the good parson would probably just stop and gape at him. The Reverend's wife then fussed at him for bringing a horse into her church. He leaned over to fuss at her, and Reverend Tucker pulled out a Colt 45 and dispatched him. One shot in the forehead, clean. No information survives as to whether or not the horse stayed for the sermon. However, we do know, without a doubt, that Reverend Tucker then put away his firearm and continued his sermon. And the authorities pulled the body out later. Now, Pat, have you ever had anything like that?
Thought about it a few times.
Reverend Tucker is buried on the east side of Oakland, and everybody else is lined up with the cemetery. Now, Shreveport is not due north-south, east-west. It's 41 degrees off because Henry Shreve set the town to fit with the plateau that Shreveport is on. We're on part of that. Well, Reverend Tucker didn't do that. He says, you know, being faithful to the Lord, I need to be able to face east. And so when you look at it, instead of his magnificent column being lined up, he's 41 degrees off everybody else. Would he put a cross on his column? No. He wanted everybody to know where he was, so it has 4 T's, one on each side for Tucker. There is a set of monuments in the center of Oakland. A couple of tall obelisks and a bunch of small tombs, only about 2 feet tall. And this is the Prescott lot. Mr. Prescott was a very well-known, influential, wealthy real estate broker. And when the yellow fever outbreak occurred, Mr. Prescott lost his wife and lost 6 of his children. It's the only block that you could go to and see graves in there that said, born in Mount Lebanon, died in the Great Yellow Fever epidemic in Shreveport in 1873. His oldest son survives, and he will remarry. So you're looking at this lot, and my students really, they pick up on some potatoes. And you start looking at it very closely, and you realize that there's a really nice, tall, George Washington monument type of obelisk. And then there's a slightly shorter one. You think, well, that must be the wife that died in the epidemic. No, this is wife number 2. Wife number 2 had the good sense never to, disparage wife number 1. She does get a taller monument. However, if you look at the back of the Prescott lot and you see wife number 1, she's under a magnificent 4-foot tall column. And I have my students look at it and say, tell me about this, tell me the story, go read everything and let me know. And only one of them in about 10 years has figured it out without me telling them. Yes, wife number 2 has a very tall obelisk, only about 2 feet below the height of the husband. But the wife who died in the epidemic, her monument is that of a chess queen. That's the love of his life. And my students look at it, and the girls start crying. Then they get beyond their room. There's another family out there that's very, very famous, the Fosters. James Martin Foster and his clan. James Martin Foster was the first cousin of Murphy Foster, the first Governor Foster. Mike Foster's the grandson of Murphy. And the Fosters were the largest landowners here. Anybody hear about the Fosters? Anybody ever read about them? Good for you. Fine, fine family. You know how many acres they owned?
I think it was 10,000.
No, that's 12,000 on this side of the river. That was the little one called Little Egypt. In Bossier, they owned over 25,000 acres. And it went all the way from where Clyde Fenn on our side is today to past the racetrack. Later on, that's called the Full Love Plantation, but it was the Foster Plantation. Before Industrial Drive was renamed that, it was Foster Road. And that's where the plantation headquarters were. There are 14 Fosters buried in that lot. And you have to really decipher how it's set up because they are under the largest monument out there, a cenotaph, another obelisk. But one of the brothers, one of James Martin Foster's sons was Clayton Lee Foster. You and I need to talk because you may know something I don't. Clayton Lee Foster sits under a grandiose Greco-Roman column. It has a drape over it to show that it's a life cut short. It has a cavalry saber. It has a sash, all carved in marble. Captain, Company G, 5th U.S. Cavalry, dies in 1890 at Fort Reno, Indian Territory. That's Oklahoma. Maybe of illness. I've talked to some other family members. Nobody so far is really sure. Maybe of illness. But 1890 was the year of the ghost dance, the last great Indian uprising. Either way, he died serving his country in what was a semi-foreign land, owned by the United States but controlled by the Indian tribes. There's tons of people and tons of biographies in Oakland that tell us the story of us, who we are, how we got here. The oldest and second oldest Jewish cemetery in Louisiana is inside Oakland. And it's the largest one north of New Orleans until after 1900. That's Hebrew rest number 1. Some of those stones are amazingly carved. One last thing, and then I'll break it up into questions. We had 3 master stone carvers in Shreveport in the 19th century. All of them were nationally known. All of them did commissions, not only in this region, but across the U.S. The most famous of these was William Kinney, who was a Roman Catholic, was an absolute master at carving marble. He was the best carver of Hebrew that you could imagine. Go through Oakland and look in the Hebrew rest, and he signs it. Kinney, W. Kinney. If he had a partner, Hecox and Kinney, but it's William Kinney. And amazing, amazing things. You can see them in East Texas and South Arkansas as well as here. William Kinney did not do his own tombstone. He lies under a commercial purchase from Sears. Sears used to sell tombstones. They used to build houses. Why not? Tombstones are easy compared to a craftsman. Nondescript tombstone with a Confederate flag on it because he was a Confederate veteran. His monuments truly speak for what he built as much as who he was. So walk out there. It's a safe place now. Wait till it cools off a little bit. My students are still melting. We are mapping it. You can go up on billiongraves.com. We are up over 1,800 monuments now. You can click on any of the pegs, and you can see the tombstone. You can go onto it on your PC. You can read about the people. It's really a labor of love for us. My students get a kick out of it. It gets them out of a regular classroom. I call it history outside the box. So, questions?
Gary, tell them.
I know you.
I know you.
You better identify who you are because she's a ringer.
I'm Anna Maria Sparkhill. I'm the president of the Oakland Cemetery Preservation Society.
I'm vice president.
Gary's vice president. Tell them about the forward-looking infrared radar that your students have used
Yes.
in the cemetery.
We use some pretty high-tech gear to find graves that are not marked, and we use FLIR. Same technology that's used on fighter planes and attack helicopters. And we can take it, although it's too hot to do it right now, we can take it and shoot it at a very shallow angle, and even after it's been mowed and you're looking at something as smooth as the top of the pool table, you can see ripples. And so then we go out and we mark where they are. We're also using ground penetrating radar, which allows us to look down about 4 to 6 feet. If it'll ever rain, Pat, you got to work on it. The ground's so hard, you can't look down and see where the voids are. Once it cools off and it starts raining, we can take it out there and we can start mapping voids. When we do that for a lot of other cemeteries, this is part of my work at LSU Shreveport. We do a lot of public service. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in your mention of the yellow fever epidemic, I understand there's a lot of graves out there, like maybe 1,000 mass burials. Did that truly happen? And
Yes.
how are those mass, did they bury on top of them? Are there large open areas where that mass grave is?
That's a good question. We've identified right at 850. 50 or so people are under individual graves, but almost 800 lie in a common grave, several layers deep. Yellow fever hit us between August 20th, 1873 and November 12th. The people that could get out of the city got out of the city. There were about 15,000 to 20,000 people before then. 4,000 were inside the city when it broke out. And a quarter of them died in 3 weeks. Now let's think about this for a minute. If it happened today, in 3 weeks, we would lose 50,000 people inside the city limits of Shreveport. There are not enough funeral homes to take care of that. So what do? You open up a trench, and there were very, very few Christian burials. They would take the bodies, they would put quicklime on them, then they would sew them up in a shroud, and then they would take them out 24 hours a day, and they would put them down into these trenches. They would put broken up ceramics to hold the dirt together, and then they would start again. The tallest hill in Oakland then became a mound, and it's on the Monmouth Street side, away from Municipal. There's now a sidewalk going up to the marker. The marker, by the way, is wrong. The Shreveport Times said that there were 759 people. However, the Shreveport Times, which published every day during the epidemic, they didn't go back and read their dailies. I took the dailies. I read every page during that epidemic, and I've created an Excel file. The Excel file sometimes shows when, down to the hour when somebody died. 2 people were killed by gunshots a few years ago. One of them came up, and we had clay put back on top of it. The city's been very good, but in the middle of the rib cage was a 32 caliber slug. So I retrieved the 32 caliber slug, and I thought, well, that's interesting, not supposed to be here. And then about 3 years ago, researching and building that Excel file, I found that he was a burglar. And I found who shot him. I found the address on Texas Street where he was shot. And now when I teach that local history, I go in like Jonathan Edwards used to when he was working, preaching with his hellfire and brimstone. You know, I'll reach in my pocket and say, that's what got him. And students are banjo-eyed and slap job for days. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Good question. Are the people in the mass grave identified in any way?
Only to themselves and God.
Second question, you talked
I know who they are. I just can't tell you. You're here. You're here. You're here.
There's no marker with their name.
There is a bronze marker. But we're about to take care of that. In this Billion Graves app that I talked about, we can put in the names of people. If I don't blow the software out, it's up, you know, it's cloud-based. We're going to have over 750 names out of that one marker, and you can go track it.
Great.
And we have it up on the website. It'll be up there. We have a really good website called Oakland Cemetary, LA.org, and you can link to this.
You spoke of reading the Daily Times during that period. Is there a collection anywhere of all of the issues of the Shreveport Times? Do you have
Yes.
that at LSU?
No, it's in their morgue. Old newspapers are called morgue. It's not just the obituaries.
Now, they say they don't have them.
Yeah, I know. I could tell you, but I have to kill you. Yes.
Jerry, can you put the other cemeteries in kind of a chronological list for us as to when people start being buried in Greenwood?
Greenwood was started in 1892. However, the first burial's in 1894. It's still active.
Is Greenwood the one out at Centenary?
On Stone. You start having religious cemeteries, Catholic and the other Jewish cemeteries, when Oakland was filling up. And in Greenwood, you've got sections of people. The Masons are there, Knights of Pythias, Oddfellows, Unions are there, but B'nai Zion created 2 more cemeteries, and Hudathaka created one, and then of course you've got St. Joseph's and on down the line. African American Cemetery first is Starr and Carver. But they're all because Oakland filled up too fast. If you think there's only white people in Oakland, you're wrong. We found 102 so far. Blacks. That's terrific. That speaks well of us. I don't think we understand today what that means, but it does speak well of us. We were not your typical southern city. Now, we were mean. We were westernmost frontier town in the United States for a few years, and we acted like it. We still do. You're bad to the bone, you're always going to be bad to the bone. But at least we're fun with it. Yes, sir. One more.
I have a great-grandfather who is buried in that cemetery. His son, my grandfather, had come to this country in 1850s or something like that, and he brought his father over later, and the gentleman died about the same time he got here, and they buried him in a corner of that cemetery. That was before they had sectarian plots.
What was his name?
I don't know.